This episode of the Lunch with Chris show is brought to you by my upcoming book, 30 Days to Limitless. You can find out more about it at limitless30.com.
This podcast is certified fresh. Freshmediaworks.com.
Welcome to the Lunch with Chris show, where your host, Chris Daly, talks with movers and shakers from all walks of life to get their opinions on important questions. Each season, there is a new question and new guests. This short, impactful show skips all the fluff and just brings you insightful answers from great guests. And now, doing his part to change the world in a positive way, your host, Chris Daly.
My next guest is a gentleman who has done some extremely important work. This is with J.B. Rice of the Texas Counter-Trafficking Initiative. All right, everybody join me in welcoming J.B. Rice from the Texas Counter-Trafficking Initiative to the show. J.B., how are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing excellent. And without giving me everything that the Counter-Trafficking Initiative does, give a 30-second overview of what that is.
Okay, we're a small group of folks, a couple of private investigators that specialize in the location and recovery of DMST kiddos, or that's domestic juveniles that are being trafficked domestically. Our main area of operation is going to be in Texas, but we have followed cases out of state, and that's it in a nutshell. Okay,
and explain to people who may have seen the terms about child trafficking and sex trafficking and drug trafficking. Define trafficking.
So several different types of trafficking, of course. There's within human trafficking, there is labor trafficking and sex trafficking. I think that's fairly self-explanatory.
Right.
We have no overlap in drug trafficking necessarily or in labor trafficking. So our view is fairly narrow.
The movie Sound of Freedom, that kind of hits exactly on what it is y'all focus on, right?
Well, okay. So, in full disclosure, I've not seen the movie.
Okay.
I've not seen the movie. I understand that the movie deals with international trafficking, but the children being trafficked. I understand the movie were very, very young.
Yes.
The vast majority of the victims that we see are between 11 and 17 years old. That's kind of norm in our world.
Okay. And before we get into your world, let's back up. Tell me about where you grew up and how you found yourself in this line of work.
I'd never meant to do this. I started off life in Dallas. Grew up in Oak Cliff, an area in southwest Dallas. Moved to Houston during high school and finished high school there. And honestly, most of my adult life, just a series of jobs, none of them stuck as a career necessarily, none of them involving any investigations. So I had no background in this when it started. So that being said, it actually started with me helping a friend locate his missing niece. And honestly, I thought that I was just helping a friend out. And when we got her located, I thought I was, that was that. I was kind of one and done. And I think that God had different plans.
Yeah. And then what was the steps? What happened to get you from, okay, I did this, we that case resolved, to now you're doing it full time? That's just, a big jump.
Yes, and the number of cases lost, honestly, I've lost count of over the years. So it's been right around 8 years now that I first started, and had a regular job, self-employed, had a little shop. The friend's case, the case of his niece, they were getting, the family put up a Facebook post, missing child. She was a 14-year-old. They were getting tips on Facebook that she was popping up in half a dozen areas, relatively local to where they were. And my friend came to me and said, we just don't have enough family members on the street to cover all the bases, and we feel like we're playing whack-a-mole. So I volunteered to help. And after about 3 days of that, I went to this child's mother and told her, I want to take a look at her phone records. And mind you, this was a number of years ago, and Facebook was still the social media site, even for the youngsters. And the very last number she had contacted, I looked up that number. I bought a little cheap database, found out it was a VoIP number, so that was a dead end. I literally went to Facebook and entered that phone number into the search block. And there was a post that came up where a guy was advertising a hip-hop act. And he was going by a name that was not a real name, and it was obvious. But I kind of stalked that page and got back, the months previous where somebody had wished him a happy birthday, and it was happy birthday, baby brother, was the way it was presented. So it just sounded and felt real familial, not just a random person, not like, hey, brother, but baby brother. So I jumped over to that page, got a real identity on the person that owned that page. Then I went to look at potential family members on yet another database that I bought, and came up with a guy that had the same date of birth. And the name kind of fit the month year that he was using on Facebook. So I looked up his criminal record on the district clerk's website, and he had been arrested for trafficking a juvenile previously. We couldn't get a call back from the county. We were blowing up every number we could to get a county detective in the county that she was reported missing in, and it was radio silence. So I had a friend that worked for the state police that was one of the training officers, and I called him, and I told him, hey, basically wanting to know if he knew anybody at the county that he could kind of push off center to get to contact us, because this child was with somebody that I was sure was a pimp and a gangster. There were photos of him. I had another friend of mine that that's pretty astute at reading ink and understanding, the gang ink, and found out that this guy was involved with one of the Houston gangs. Actually, one of the nationwide gangs, but they had a presence in Houston. And he told me that a county deputy is not what I needed. I needed a human trafficking detective. And that was the first time I'd heard those terms together. So I at that time, I just assumed that vice was vice, and that's not entirely true. So he went to one of his coworkers' offices and called me back in about 5 minutes. That detective wanted me to download what I had found so far. The Facebook page is the phone number, like the timeline. So I did. Got a call back probably an hour later, and they had located an ad on this child in Austin, Texas. So we were in the Houston area. We were in the suburbs in the Houston area. So I loaded up with the father and started heading to Austin. I had no idea what that was going to look like, but she was in Austin, and that's where we needed to be. Got about halfway, which is about a 3-hour drive. Got about halfway, the phone rang again, and they had already set up operation to recover and had recovered this child. And he told me to tell the parents to go to, he named the hospital, gave me an address. And I told him, well, we're already en route to Austin. I'm with the father. We'll be there. So we recovered this child, and in that contact, in the contact that I had with the child after that, I heard the story, like from her, which is something that's highly unusual. Usually they're not going to talk about the trauma they just went through. But she talked quite a bit, and it was disturbing. So we get back, and I kind of stay plugged in with my friend to, to see how she's doing, like what's happening. Yeah. And, so far as like forensic interviews and that kind of thing. I'd never been exposed to any of that before, so I didn't know what the process looked like. But I went back to work, and about 2 weeks later, I got a phone call, and it was a lady that was crying and was sobbing to the point that I couldn't understand her, didn't recognize the number, wasn't sure what was going on. And I was genuinely confused as to why I'm getting a phone call from this lady that I don't think I know. And she finally calmed down enough to tell me that her daughter was missing. And I was really confused then. I'm like, well, why are you calling me?
Right.
And she had put out a Facebook post, and first child's mother had apparently sent her a message saying, hey, this is the guy that helped us when the police wouldn't. So my empathy kind of took over, and I was like, okay, I learned a few things the first time around. Let me see if I can spot anything that may be helpful. So I wound up going to that family's house, and first things I asked for was phone records and social media. And sure enough, there was a pattern in her phone records that was, most people she texted. This one she was having live phone calls with. Looked up the number, and it was a live number. It appeared to belong to a 27-year-old man, and we found out later, in fact, that was correct. And I called that very same detective, and I told him, hey, I don't think this is a trafficking case, but we may have a predator with a child.
Yeah.
And he informed me, we go after predators too. So I downloaded what I had. He was able to do what law enforcement does and get warrants, and one thing led to another pretty quickly. It seemed like it was about 6 hours later. They had her recovered, and they had the pedophile arrested. So I realized at that point that sometimes there's just a disconnect in information.
Yeah.
But the phone started ringing more often. And then I was recruited by an organization that searches for missing people in general, not specifically trafficking victims, but
right. Like Equisearch or somebody?
It was a similar organization, but not as well known or as large.
Right.
So, and it was relatively local to the Houston area. So I agreed to volunteer with them, and it was with the understanding that if it's children and they're missing, that's one thing. If it's a body search, if you're stomping around in the weeds looking for somebody that's deceased, that is not where I'm at all. But so in doing that, we had several trafficking victims, and I kind of became that guy that took those cases, and it evolved from there. I was recruited by a second organization that was trafficking specific later, and then did that for a few years before my partner and I founded Texas CTI. So, but that was the whole lot that happened in that 8 years, and my life became a series of side hustles to finance what I do.
Right.
And so had that juggling act. You know, there were times when, you know, paying for the next tank of fuel was at issue.
Sure. Yeah.
But, you know, it's kind of like your head gets pulled out of the sand and you see things and learn things that you cannot unsee or unlearn. And if you turn away from that, how can you respect yourself? Like your idea and your image as a Christian man is just shot at that point. And I couldn't turn away. So I feel like it found me instead of the other way around. I was definitely not equipped. Had no background. I just had to figure things out as I went. Fortunately, I quickly developed some really good law enforcement contacts, and I learned how to some of the tricks of the trade in surveillance. And a lot of times I would have a theory, and I didn't have enough traction on a case to get anybody involved, so I'd go out to prove out that theory. And a lot of times I had a lot of success doing that. And it just kind of evolved into our current MO.
So what have you seen as far as the volume of trafficking? Because, again, I hate to keep referring back to Sound of Freedom, but it received some backlash because it reported, you know, 500,000 children go missing each year in the United States, and they were saying it's more conspiracy theory than real. But, you know, you're real, boots on the ground. What have you seen? So
I'm going to tell you that I could not argue either way on the statistics, because my worldview is really narrow, and I understand that. You know, what happens in my sphere of influence is very, very limited in the grand scheme of things. So honestly, I could not recite statistics, and I stay away from that intentionally because honestly, I don't know what the real number is. I know that in my very limited scope, sometimes we have 8 or 9 cases at a time, and that's consistent. And sometimes we have traction. Sometimes we feel like there's some markers for sex trafficking, and it turns out that may not have been the case. And then sometimes it works the other way, though, where there's girls that go missing that we don't see any of those markers, but sure enough, they have popped up on the radar of a pimp, and they've been turned out. So I imagine, you know, legitimate trafficking cases on an annual basis in the Houston area that I touch, probably around 50. 50 or 55 would probably be a good average. And the source of information, of course, anytime a child goes missing, whether they run away or they just disappear, parents tend to think that trafficking is what's happening, and that's not necessarily the case. A lot of times, children run because there's a love interest that may be age appropriate. That they run with. Sometimes they're pedophiles. Sometimes the kids have developed chemical dependency issues, and they've been able to keep that from their parents to a degree. And they're honestly out getting high and running around with some of their new friends. But all of that's very dangerous behavior and can lead to a child being introduced to a potential trafficker.
Right.
So, yes, sir. That's kind of what we see. There's another organization in Dallas that does very similar work. in my talking to their founder, we see a lot of similarities in volume and the way things happen, and
right.
So I've developed relationships with local, state, and federal agencies. There's very few human trafficking detectives in my region that I've not been on a scene with somewhere.
Right.
So I know the majority of the detectives that are focused on human trafficking in my region in Southeast Texas, and a few in the Dallas-Fort Worth area also. And to a degree, a little bit in Austin.
Got it.
I just do not have enough data points to feel like I can accurately predict the real number.
What about maybe things parents can do or should pay attention to immediately when something like this happens? A child is missing. What are some things they should do? Who should they contact?
Obviously, the first call should be to law enforcement. Get that child reported as missing right away. Depending on what city they're in, there's going to be different organizations in different areas. Of course, in Southeast Texas, Houston area included. Our organization is typically the one that's boots on the ground for trafficking victims, but some of the organizations that do outreach may also be helpful. If a child is being trafficked, our means and methods are wired to that. If a child has taken off with friends, we're probably not the people that are going to find that child.
And then what about the average person? How can, they're motivated to do something. They have no dog in the fight, so to speak. They don't have a child that's missing. They're not in the industry. What can they do? How can they help in this effort?
So it depends on what their skill set is, where it lies. To get involved with an organization that does this type of work, if you have an applicable skill set, if you're honestly, my saving grace is our CPA. She's on board, and the things that I would have difficulty doing and that would draw my attention away from our primary focus, she handles it.
Right.
So I have two people that are in different areas of IT that are on our board that are amazing at what they do. I need a rotary dial on my cell phone. So I need people like that around me. I need people like around me. My partner and I, we're both PIs, and we spend, most of our efforts are focused on the street or on online research looking for victims. And what we do is very target centric. We know who we're looking for. We're not out on the streets just looking for the random juvenile. It's hard to work backwards,
right.
To spot a girl, go, she looks very young. Let's figure out who she is. Occasionally, if you see somebody like that, especially on one of the tracks where the girls are working, you can go to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children's website and look for children that are missing in the region and see if you can get a match. If you can get a match, and contact law enforcement or contact the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They have a hotline, and say, hey, I saw this child at the corner of 5th and Main, and this is what was going on at this time. This is what she was wearing. That kind of information can help law enforcement make that recovery. You absolutely cannot just snag children off the street. Especially with parental consent. That's kidnapping. You'll go to prison. Don't do it. Movies like to glamorize and glorify the way things happen. We're not rappelling out of helicopters. We're not kicking in doors. Sometimes we're in nasty areas, and just being in those areas could potentially be unsafe. But, we try to do what we do as quietly as possible. And and just get it done, affect those recoveries, make sure the parents have the resources they need downstream. And, after that, honestly, the heavy lifting is done by law enforcement. They're the ones that have to write the warrants, to build the cases on the traffickers, to get the district attorneys or the U.S. attorneys to pick up charges. What we do is just kind of tip of the iceberg. And but we're effective at it. And we've learned that law enforcement, they have a lot of challenges, and manpower is a big challenge. They often get derailed and put on different duties, or, there's a project that supervision wants them to work on, and they really don't have the unilateral ability often to pursue the cases that they want to pursue. They're required to be other places doing other things quite often. So, and then they also have to contend with the overtime policies, and they have to have, anytime they go out and run an operation, they have to have a plan, and it's going to involve multiple officers and a lot of resources, and where we can just go in bed in a hotel if we have some evidence of a girl being in a particular hotel, and that happens more often than you would think. Yeah. But we can just go in bed in that hotel and act as kind of forward observers for law enforcement. And, having the relationships that we do with law enforcement, it makes it really a lot easier for us. We're not just calling 911 and getting any officer. We're calling a detective. And
they already have a relationship with you, right, so exactly. They trust when you say something.
They understand our work product, and they understand when we say that we've got eyes on this specific girl and this is where she's at. Our credibility has been built over the years in not wasting those resources, so we can get a response when the people that don't have the benefit of that network and that credibility would have to call 911 and hope for the best when a uniformed officer shows up. And if it's a busy district on a busy night, a runaway child is a priority 3 call. And so there's the way we are set up here in Texas, you have priority like 1 through 4, and 4 being the lowest, 1 being the highest. And sometimes 43 calls are 4 or 5 hour response times. Mm-hmm. So it does become difficult to recover a child that way, especially, like I said, in the parts of town where law enforcement's running calls for service constantly, and they're prioritizing. You might not have the same issues in smaller towns, but in the big cities, it kind of unfortunately works that way.
So in lieu of somebody doing what you're doing and staking things out and being boots on the ground, how can they help the Texas CTI?
So obviously, money's tight for everybody right now. We've been blessed over the past year that we no longer have to work side jobs to pay for our operations. We've gotten enough in donations to support that. But, obviously financially, if you have no other skill sets to lend, or if you don't have the time to put in, a lot of people want to help, but they're restricted. They have families, jobs, and life to contend with. And oftentimes, although we're searching for leads all the time, I feel very much like we operate like a fireman, potentially. We are waiting for that call to drop. We're waiting for that piece of evidence to send us somewhere. When it does, intelligence is only actionable for a small window of time. Mm-hmm. So when you do get that evidence, you can't sit on it for a day or 2 or 3. You need to go then and there. And most people's lives are not structured to where they can do that. Right. So But again, you know, having a skill set to lend to one of those organizations, if you're, you know, especially somebody that's in IT, you're familiar with open source intelligence, that sort of be, you know, a boon for any organization that does this type of work. And and those organizations look differently in different parts of the world. I know, like in Oklahoma City, they have a Oklahoma Search and Recovery Group, where they do a lot of different things. But to have somebody that's familiar with the streets, that or is familiar with open source intelligence, or that is familiar with the administration of the things they have to do to stay in up and running, maybe that type of help would free up the people that are boots on the ground. You know, aside from financial help, getting involved in that way, I think would be, and there are other organizations that help also in the restoration, on the restoration side. So with juvenile RTCs and programs, and, you know, these children need years and years of therapy, unfortunately. And a lot of times they really, truly need a residential intensive care situation for a number of months or perhaps a year or two. So those organizations need support also. And, you know, people that can help administrate or sponsor different types of therapy would be a boon for any residential treatment center. So other than that, being educated, understanding what human trafficking really looks like in the United States. You know, when you see on social media all the time people talking about somebody puts a tie wrap on your door handle at the grocery store or marks your tire one way, and people present that those are traffickers that are marking their victims. I have never seen it happen that way, ever. And, you know, while I've probably touched, you know, perhaps at this point, 400, 450 cases, that's never been how it's gone down. Most of the time what we see is older men developing relationships with young girls, a lot of times online, a lot of times their introductions through schoolmates. Maybe they go to a sleepover, go to another kid's party or what have you. Occasionally we see familial trafficking where a family member is the trafficker. Sometimes it's a neighbor. But most of the time what we see are guys that present themselves as a love interest for this child. So you have a 12, 13, 14-year-old girl who probably doesn't have a strong relationship with her father. And this 30-year-old man comes in and he's got a pocket full of money and a nice car, and she thinks he really has it going on. And he'll manipulate her. And, you know, it may look like a dating relationship at first to the child. Of course, you know, the child knows to keep it secret because she'll get her boyfriend in trouble. But she may actually sneak out of the house several times and go run away to be with this guy. And just over the course of time, they normalize, you know, promiscuity, you know, getting high. They get the kids in trouble at home, like they cause turmoil. Make sure the kids come home late, the kids come home intoxicated, create an environment at home where the parents are angry with the children. And then they present to the child, hey, you know, I have a better option for you. You know, your mom and dad's being unreasonable. Why don't you come stay with me? And then they'll present, hey, you know, you're having sex anyway. Well, why not make money? So that's kind of how they're spoon fed and brought around. And there's a cycle of abuse that's involved also. What we see with trafficking victims, there's some parallels with like battered women syndrome, and to a degree with Stockholm syndrome.
Yeah, let me ask you this, because I think I found you through a news article from a year or so ago at a Dallas station where I think it was at like a Mavericks game or something. The girl went to the restroom and then disappeared. Do you remember that story?
That case, yes. That case, I'll tell you that there are still people being prosecuted on it. So to tell you what I know about how that happened would be potentially yes. I have to stay away from that until everybody that's going to be convicted is convicted and that's put to bed. And honestly, the story of the victim is not my story to tell. That's her story to tell.
I got you.
Yeah, when she's ready.
What intrigued me was how it could happen so quick like that. You know, a scenario that doesn't seem like a grooming situation. That seems like a, hey, here's an offer, and she went for it. So,
again, I can't speak directly about that particular case, but it can happen quickly, and there are a lot of factors that are at play.
Right.
So that there's a lot of different ways it happens. That particular case was not the kind of run-of-the-mill case that we see. When I say that, it sounds horrible, but it's not.
Sure.
Odds are that's not how things go down most of the time.
Right, I got you.
But I was involved in locating a trafficker that was actually a mother one time who started selling her own child at 4 years old. That was another case that, that's just normally not what we see, but it happened. So we've seen family members that have introduced and worked as traffickers or pimps to younger family members. I've seen, and I've talked to adults that are in the life, adult women that are in the life who their mother was in the life, their father was a trafficker, their brother is a trafficker, and it's a family enterprise sometimes, and that's heartbreaking. For the people that should love you the most and be the most protective of you, for them to victimize you, how can you trust anybody ever at that point?
Yeah.
But there's a lot of trauma, and there's a lot of trauma with the first responders and the people that work with these children.
Yeah.
Mentally, it can be damaging. If you're in a fight, you're going to develop some scar tissue. That's just what it is. Secondary trauma is a real thing. If you have any empathy at all, you're going to lose sleep. You're going to be angry. You're going to go through all these emotions, and it's going to happen consistently. So the service providers, the families are traumatized. If it's never happened to your family, could you imagine that happening to one of your children?
Right.
How do you process that? How do you deal with that? And I don't believe there are enough therapists to go around. Not that are truly trauma-informed.
Let me ask you this. How, you've been involved now for, 8 years doing this sort of thing. How do you deal with that? What is your release valve?
I'm going to tell you that in this aspect of my life, I feel like I'm effective and I'm good. The rest of my life, I feel like I'm a train wreck. And, there's some things I haven't figured out. So that's, you know, that's my cross to bear.
Right. Right.
And, you know, honestly, you know, people will absolutely try to put you on a pedestal. Will tell you you're a hero. Will tell you you're an angel. Actually, had an email today where somebody was saying that, and I had to respond that, look, don't put anybody on a pedestal. We're all human. We're all broken. And although I may get some good things done, you know, I feel like I said, I've seen some things and I've learned some things that I can't unsee or unlearn, and I can't turn away. So I lean into that. I lean into that fight. And so far as dealing with it, I don't want to get too personal in my own situation, but I'll tell you that, you know, as a man, I was taught that, you know, you don't do therapy. You don't, you know, you eat whatever that pain is and move forward. And I will tell you that only works for a little while. Right.
Amen.
So I have very much become a workaholic. A normal week for me is 85, 90 hours. Sometimes it's more than that. You know, sometimes we're on target for 3 days straight. Sometimes, you know, I watch the sunrise twice before I go to sleep. And that'll make a mess of you. You start having difficulty processing. You know, your sharpness takes a hit when you do that. And it's hard to find that balance. But so far as balance in life, you know, I really don't have any outside hobbies anymore. I used to have a lot of friends. We would go fishing. I would go to their houses for whatever, barbecue. That's kind of a thing of the past. It becomes hard to connect with people. It becomes hard to relate to people. And,
right on.
You know, it's just, like I said, the price you pay.
Well, I know, you know, you only know me peripherally. We've only had a few conversations, so, you know, my advice is worth nothing. But I thank you for what you're doing, and I implore you to please take care of yourself, because that's how you can do, you know, continue to do good things. You have to take care of you.
Well, I'm working on that. I'm working on ways to try to stay as healthy as possible with the view of trying to prolong my productivity.
Right on. So how can people find out about the Texas Counter Trafficking Initiative? How can they support it? Is there a website, a phone number?
Yes. We have our website is txcti.org, and there's a way to donate on the website. It's a little button. It's pretty front and center up top when you first go to the page. We're not posting any case history. We're not posting any of that on there. It's just kind of who we are, how to contact us, and what we do. So it's pretty basic. I quit posting on Facebook. I have a Facebook page. Quit posting on Facebook a number of months ago. I'd put in some traffickers on blast, and these were all, you know, all the photos, with the exception of a few bug shots, were ones that I took on scene as traffickers were being arrested. I was counseled to be cautious of that because of the potential impact in a case. And, you know, if I misspoke or, you know, those sorts. So honestly, I've stopped doing that. And every once in a while, and when I say every once in a while, I think it's been probably, maybe close to a year before I've actually posted anything. But we do have a Facebook page, and occasionally I'll post something like if the case takes us to a city that we're not familiar with, I may reach out. We have like 2,500 followers, so it's not huge. But I'll reach out. You know, does anybody have any local knowledge in this area? And then I'll direct message them and, you know, try to get my bearings and wherever wherever I'm operating. You know, while most of our cases originate here in Texas, it does not preclude me from taking cases out of state, and
right.
it may be more trying to manipulate social media and searching for ads when they're out of state, kind of out of reach. You have to get with the parents and see what kind of resources they have locally, so far as people that are willing to do a physical ground search and try to help them, give them a little bit of guidance during that. So even though we are the Texas Counter Trafficking Initiative, I'll take calls from anywhere. If there's a missing child that has any markers, I'm going to do everything that I can to try to locate that child or find evidence that helps anyway. Right
on. Yeah, we will share that information out on the show notes, so it'll go out to everybody that we reach. But JB, gosh, I want to thank you so much for sitting down with me, sharing some of this story, and more importantly, for the work that you're doing. God bless you for all that.
Thank you. I really appreciate it, and we'll talk to you soon.